Hey there, revolutionary. Before we dive into today's episode, I have something super exciting to share with you. If you've been struggling to find your breakthrough moment and you're ready to take your author career to the next level, I want to invite you to check out the High Vibe Author Membership. It's my new membership packed with transformative courses, powerful meditations and hypnoses, and a supportive community that's here to help you manifest the abundant author life you've always dreamed of. Head over to authorrevolution.org/high vibe to learn more and start your journey to success today. Welcome to the Author Revolution podcast, where change is not just embraced, it's celebrated. I'm Carissa Andrews, international best-selling author, indie author coach, and your navigator through the ever-evolving landscape of authorship. Are you ready to harness the power of your mind and the latest innovations in technology for your writing journey? If you're passionate about manifesting your dreams and pioneering new writing frontiers, then you're in the perfect place. Here, we merge the mystical woo of writing with the exciting advancements of the modern world. We dive into the realms of mindset, manifestation, and the transformative magic that occurs when you believe in the impossible. We also venture into the world of futuristic technologies and strategies, preparing you for the next chapter in your author career. Every week, we explore new ways to revolutionize your writing and publishing experience. From AI to breakthrough thinking, this podcast is your gateway to a world where creativity meets innovation. Whether you're penning your first novel or expanding your literary empire, whether you're a devotee of the pen or a digital storyteller, this podcast is where your author revolution gains momentum. So join me in this journey to continue growth and transformation. It's time to redefine what it means to be an author in today's dynamic world. This is the Author Revolution podcast, and your author revolution starts now. Well, hi guys, welcome to another episode of the Author Revolution podcast. This week, we are going to be having an interview that is really, really fascinating. So not only is my guest today an author, he is a best-selling author, he is a best-selling fantasy author, but also he is an entrepreneur at heart. He is someone who understands the business side of being an author in a way that a lot of us, I think, in the indie sphere don't really grasp. And some of the things that we're going to talk about today are going to help you align your author career in a way that maybe you've never even dreamed of before. He talks about his fantasy series and all the different areas and aspects that he's been able to diversify his world, including things like AR and VR, graphic novels. Like, there's a whole bunch of things that you're going to want to listen to and kind of wrap your head around. Even if you're not a fantasy author, this is definitely going to be one that's going to give you some insights into how to make your author career an even bigger thing, right? But if you are a fantasy author, he gives some great tips on that as well, including world building and things that you're going to just want to wrap your head around. So this episode is so juicy. I know you're going to love it. So without further ado, let's get into it. Well, hi, Joe. Welcome to the Author Revolution podcast. I'm really excited to bring you onto the show today. We have so much fun stuff to discuss. But before we get started, can you tell my audience just a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. And again, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to our engagement here and in our
Hey.
discussion. And I am a fantasy adventure author. And to get more specific, I write in epic fantasy and dark fantasy. So if you're a fan of Game of Thrones, that's more dark fantasy. Or if you're a fan of Lord of the Rings, that's more epic or classic fantasy. You'll find a nice mesh of those two. I like to say mine is Lord of the Rings meets Dracula, and
Love
the good
it.
guys don't always win, and there's a little gothic spun up in there, and that's who I am and what I do. And my novels, I've got my first series finishing up here in the next 45 days with the launch of book 4. So the quadrilogy of the Warminster Saga will be over and all officially available publicly, and I'm just looking forward to getting that done, and then a few fun things happening after that.
Right? There are definitely fun things happening after that. So you
Yeah.
you mentioned your series, the Warminster Saga. Can you describe like what that was like to go from like an aspiring writer to now best-selling author in this with this series? How was that?
It was unexpected. I started writing during COVID. And prior to that, I was a defense lobbyist. So I spent a lot of time in DC. working with defense and tech companies, and that's what I had done for 20 years of my life and what I had known. But COVID shut down not just DC, it shut down everywhere. And this was always on the bucket list of things to do. And every day I wrote something. So whether it was a speech or a grant or a contract or something, I was always writing. But there's a big difference between writing nonfiction and fiction. There's things like pacing and dialogue and other things you don't have to worry about when you're writing the stuff that I do. But the practice of writing was something that was easy to stay involved in, and I didn't mind, clacking away at a keyboard to get this done. And I'm a busybody. I own a couple of companies, so for me, not having anything to do is the worst thing in the world. An
Right.
object in
We're the
motion
best in
tends
this
to stay in
case.
motion. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I was able to. I made the silver lining, as you described, the best in this case, out of a really horrible situation, and ended up writing what I thought was going to be a standalone novel. And when I went to go get it published, my eventual publisher said, "No, fantasy's all series. Everybody writes series. It's expected. You do too much world building, not for it to be a series, and people are going to want more." So she signed me for what I thought was going to be a trilogy, and now has kind of bled into a quadrilogy, which is a lot of fun. And finally coming to the end of it. We're going through the last throes of editing, and book 4 here will be launched probably sometime in June. So fingers crossed that goes across the line. And that's kind of how it started. And I've used a lot of my nerdy Dungeons and Dragons experience,
Right.
to help me with story building and things like that. But it's been a lot of fun, and I'm not looking back. This has just been so much better than what I was doing. I don't mind. I look at it as a golf course. I'm on the back 9 of my career. I want to finish it doing this. So I'm
Yeah,
totally
why
fine.
would you want to
I
go back
never
to
have a problem
defense
getting out of bed.
contracts? Like, really?
No,
You're in a different
no.
world now. Come on.
Oh, I have a funny story about that. Like my first interview, I did with a radio show host when the books came out, and I prepared almost like for a day and a half for the interview because in my previous life, my previous iteration, my profession, there's always a gotcha moment, and they always have a point counterpoint and all these other kinds. And I didn't know what to expect, and I got on there, and the guy asked me, "So, what season of the year do you enjoy writing in the most?" And it was at that point I realized, hey, this guy's trying to help me out. Like, what is he doing? Like, I expected to have this, this moment where it was because in the past that's what it had been for me, and all of a sudden it was like, wait, instead of being a competitor, you're collaborating with me, and so it was a lot of fun, And at that point, I was like, oh, I get it. Not everything's like the stuff I do every day, and I'm not looking back. This is just so much fun.
Oh, right. I loved writing as well. It's like once I switched my own, like I was in graphic design before I started writing. And it was like as soon as you start doing it and you start envisioning these new worlds and all these different ways things can come together, it's like, why would you want to go back to like corporate world? Like that just no. I'm right there with you
Agreed.
on that.
Agreed.
Yeah. So you mentioned that your worlds, have elements of dark fantasy, but you also entwine real life ghost stories. So could you share how you've incorporated them into your narratives and maybe perhaps share a ghost story that inspired one of your novels?
Yeah, sure. So for me, I find that when you build a world that's entirely fantastical, you need to inject realism into it for it to be more believable. You're bringing people this entire world that you've built, and you have to ground it in something. Is there gravity? Is the sky blue? What kind of vehicles do they travel on? The technology they have, currency, pantheon of gods, like all that kind of stuff. So you build it out, and it's brand new. You have to define it for them, and you define it by things that they're comfortable with. And so I used a lot of Norse and Native American and African mythology to build up my monsters and the characters that were in it, alongside what I would say is kind of tropish, typical elves and a Tolkien Dungeons and Dragons-y kind of a background. Because again, our readers in fantasy adventure expect that. That's what they want to see. They want to see some
Right.
some semblance of a medieval society with magic thrown into it. And so I started to look at that. However, and I'm a big fan of Bram Stoker. I used Dracula for a reason before. He took real life events and placed them into Dracula to make them more believable. And at the time, he set Dracula in a place in London where there were Jack the Ripper murders, and it made it scarier for people in a contemporary time for him, or this ghost schooner that had arrived. Literally in real life, there was a real Russian schooner that sailed into a port with nobody on it, and they have no idea what happened.
Wow.
And he used that event to kind of bake into the story because it happened and it scared the people of Whitby, this little village where this was. And so I wanted to do a lot of the same stuff. So if you find real life ghost stories that make things scary, or things that people they're like, oh, that reminds me of something that I've read or something that I've experienced, and that brings them into it because it's easier for them to accept in this entire fantasy world that you're creating. And so for me, I took something that was as simple as a recurring nightmare I had as a kid when I was between 16 and the ages of 16 and 20. So like late puberty and early adulthood, I had a series of these nightmares they weren't the same nightmare, but they were all connected, and it would start where the last one stopped. And they weren't every night. They were once every 3 months, once every 6 months. But in my dream, this creature that claimed it was my guardian angel was telling me to do things, and if I did them in real life, he would reward me in my dreams, and or if I didn't do them, he would attack me and try
What?
to convince me to do it, and all of these things. And I used that experience, which for a man that should be like when you're that age, you shouldn't be afraid of your dreams anymore. They were scary. So I created my own. The main character in my novels, Damus Alaric, is a prophet, and he sees things coming from the future. And he sees this fallen keeper, one of his own, that used their sight, their prophecy, in a bad way, where their god cursed them and stole his sight and his ability to see. And as a result, these two come to clash, and Damus is the only one that could see him coming back. He has a clear line at it. And I kind of cast my own dream experience as the villain because it scared me. I knew it was going to scare everybody else. And so Grey Taurus the
Yeah.
Mad, this creature I created was based on that. I also used a local cemetery here where there was a Civil War battle that was fought not far from me in Pittsburgh. And long and short of it, there were names on grave sites that were there. And there was this 6-year-old girl named Lily Beisner. And it just had her name. She lived from 1900 to 1906. And then underneath it said only sleeping. And I was like, oh, that's a story, right? Like, and the
Yeah.
idea that the Civil War, there are folks that always go to this graveyard and they're always camping out, ghost hunter types that are there to capture some of the Civil War ghost like things that go on there. And all of that I kind of put aside, and my eyes as an author just gravitated to this lonely story about her and what could have happened to her in her story. And in the middle of it's all these German settlers, and there's this pillar in the middle that says Beisner on it. And you're like, oh, this is one of the families. And you go there and you see this little tragic story. And I'm like, how do I take that and bake that into my books? How do I make that something? Because not only will people remember that, but also, I think that's something that will scare people. And so you had this whole graveyard ghost hunting thing going on with that I watched pretty much every weekend from the time I was growing up. People going into there and doing their
Sure.
ghost hunts on the weekend too, using that for my book. So those are two ways that I baked them into my book. One is just a character arc and a theme for the book, and the other is sort of a hidden ghost story, which I'm not going to. No spoiler alerts. I'm not going to tell you where it pops up, but
That
you'll
is
you'll
so
find
cool.
you'll find that in there.
I
Yeah,
love that. I love that. And I love the concept of bringing something that is realistic into your stories and giving it a bit of that gravity, because I think that's probably where urban fantasy comes about, like where we can take the urban real life world and then overlay magic on top of it and see what happens. Because then it gives that realism to, like, what if magic were all around us too? But I think that's really a cool idea.
exactly right.
Yeah. So neat.
And that's why I think that's so super popular. I mean, we see a lot of urban fantasy and magical realism in stories these days, and people don't even know that they're seeing it. But if they
Right.
step back from it and say, "Oh, Twilight, I get that," or Hunger Games, I get that. You know what I mean? And there's a dystopian or a sci-fi kind of flair, and I've done that too. Like
Yeah.
to create the baronies in my realm. Look, there's no better field in which you can learn this than political science, right? And I
I
spent
bet.
20 years in DC, so I see how domestic government, how international governments work, how they treat one another, and then how they work with one another or become enemies. And I use that as not just the basis of the governance of the realm of Warminster, but I've also baked into it my own form of currencies, and also what I would describe as I have my own version of the Pentagon called Abacus, which is this city of scholars where you go to develop new technologies that allow me to put a little sci-fi thread into my novels. I kind of liken it to Q and James Bond, where every now and then the heroes or the villains make their way to some Abacunian technology that they take and they use it in the field. Because I think if I had a pet peeve, it's the fact that in all of these novels, these societies have been around for like 3,000 years, and there's still no scientific advancement. So I don't blow it up. There's no spaceships or ray guns or anything like that, but I bring into it just a little bit of this advancement for maybe this is a Renaissance technology as opposed to medieval, but it's just enough to give the good guys an advantage or the bad guys something to fear. And I think that's part of
Sure.
it too. And it's just real life stuff that I've kind of baked into it.
That's really clever. I think that's a clever usage of being able to, in a sense, almost genre bend too. Like you're taking like elements from different. I mean, you're already doing that with the paranormal, almost horror-esque aspect of things as well, pulling everything kind of in. Do you like a lot of different genres? I'm assuming you do because you're able to pull so much in.
Yeah, I think that if you're a fantasy buff like I am, you're also going to like sci-fi or dystopian or steampunk or horror. There's always some element of that that grabs your attention because it's something.
Yeah.
What I'm reading is all unreal, and then in other things you see things that are unreal adjacent, right? So like
Right.
you
Yeah.
mentioned
Yeah.
before,
Yeah.
urban fantasy. Like, of course I'm going to like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or I'm going to like some of these other things. So you're just because it's cool. The Librarians or any of those kind of shows that you see on Netflix or you go to the movies because it's close enough, right? And I
Yeah.
think that for me, even though I write in something that is entirely epic fantasy slash dark fantasy, the little injections in there are cheats that'll satisfy the whims of those that have the same kind of curiosity as I do. Because I've always wondered why Jon Snow is still fighting with a sword and shield, right?
Okay.
Or why certain characters, it's like, well, you have magic, but you can't create any technologies with that magic. And like, how does that work? Or you see like steampunk or cyberpunk, and you're like, all right, well, this is kind of cool. And like Arcana, for example. I mean, love that show, but it's kind of like this dystopian, futuristic, Ready Player One world that goes awry, and you just kind of grab little elements of that and sprinkle them in, so you're not upsetting the balance of the fantasy, your meal that you're trying to cook, but enough that it's an appetizer for those like me that appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it ties in so nicely because then it creates that intrigue in a story, especially when it's something that not every author does. It makes your voice stand out more. You know what I mean? It makes it
Yeah,
more interesting,
yeah.
especially for those of us, like you said, who like the genre bent aspect of things and being able to see elements from different genres in the same story. I personally enjoy that myself. And it's so nice to see when other authors can do it successfully and are doing it intentionally. It's so cool. I love that. So how was
Okay.
it? How was the creation? How did that work for you when it came to the world building aspect of Warminster? Like, what was your process? What did that look like?
So for me, it was I had a cheat code, right? And my cheat code was I'm a nerd and I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons for 20 years. And if you asked everybody I work with in DC that I wrote a fantasy book and played Dungeons and Dragons, everybody would laugh at you. But I play Dungeons and Dragons every Sunday night, 6 to 10
Were you a
p.m. with
DM?
my friends. I am a DM, so you see where
There
I'm
we
going with
go.
this, right? So I now have, I've got 20 years since I was 10 years old. I started playing Dungeons and Dragons, and you get these great stories. And so there are so many strong fantasy authors out there that have done the same thing. Margaret
Yeah,
Weiss, Tracy Hickman, R.A. Salvatore. You see, they're littered in my Barnes and Noble. They're all people that have taken their D&D-ish characters, some of which have licensed to write under the D&D moniker, which I don't. So I created my own realm with my own rules. But it's close enough that people get it, right? It's that
yeah,
tropey kind of thing with also creating my own races and characters and stuff. But I was able to do that because, once you play D&D a few times, you can make up your own, you figure out that there really isn't any rules and you can make it up how you want. And so I was able to take what I thought were some of our best adventures and the best responses I got from my player characters related to villains and
mm,
situations and plot arcs and things that you build as a verbal storyteller, as a dungeon master, and then just now putting them in writing, and you're telling it now in a different medium. In this case, it's through a novel, or a series of novels. And
yeah,
so I was practiced in that vein, and I also had battle tested stuff. And then it was a matter of taking what I would describe as our group's favorites over the year, meshing them together where it made sense, smoothing it out a little bit, but then making a real brand new story out of it. Like some of the characters, my friends get a kick out of seeing their characters' names come to life, but they're like, "Well, that's not my character," and I'm like, "It doesn't matter, does it? Really? I mean, I'm just using a
Right.
character's name, that kind of stuff." But the idea behind it is yeah, like I want to go out and do like take as much from what I've done that's had the best response that I know and put it into a 4 book series because people are going to like that too. Or like my assumption is it's already gotten a little bit of a head start. And so the worlds I've created, coupled with the tropes that people expect, coupled with new stuff that everybody wants and expects, and with battle tested stories, like I said, I got a little bit of a head start. That's my cheat code.
Sure.
Dungeons and
How do you
Dragons.
keep track of
See
everything?
nerds.
Do you have like a
Oh my
system?
God. I am the world's biggest plotter and planner. Like I can't
I love it.
the pantsing thing. I'm so horrible. So I've memorialized everything we've done just for my own obsessive compulsiveness about it. And over the years, and I went back and looked at some of our old adventures, relived them, and like laughed about stuff that you had forgot about, hadn't played in 10 years, and then take the heart of those stories and inject them into the book. So I've had this library of Dungeons and Dragons adventures that I've saved, whether in part online and or old school Dungeons and Dragons sheets for the
Right.
character sheets, and have them cobble them all together, and then sat down. And for me, I'm a whiteboard freak, so I've got a couple in my den. I got a couple of whiteboards, and it looks like a March Madness bracket with all of these plot arcs and character arcs coming together on it. And then when I'm done with them, I erase them so I know what's left. And so I have everything on the boards. And then when they finally get woven into the novels, at that point I could take them off the board. If not, if they're still there, that means I got to do something with them. And
Smart.
if someone came in and erased them, I would be in a world of hurt, because even though I do have like, I'll show you that you probably won't be able to see it, but I've got papers here that I'm writing the bullet points of stuff that I need to do on them, as part of things that. So I'll print them out so they know where I'm going, or I'll have them up on one screen and then I'm writing on the other screen. So I've got my system, and it's not the best, but it works for me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. What are your friends who play D&D with you, like what do they think of the novels? Have they read them?
They, of course, right? Like
Yeah,
most of them out of curiosity, but also there's a fandom from it, right? Like they
sure.
they they know that they're going to see some stories that are familiar with them, with new spins on them. They're going to see where I wanted to take them, and a lot of them, give me ideas. They're good beta readers for me because they
Mhm.
all like the genre. They all read the genre. You know, and I think that's important for it. And they also help me, break up writer's block a little bit, where, um, if I'm stuck somewhere, I can brainstorm with them because they're all used to playing.
Yeah.
And for them, this is what I thought was going to happen, and it didn't. And then I can say, oh, well, that's what can happen in the story. So, I've had a group of probably 10 to 12 over the years. 6 to 8 of them I stay in close contact with, and 3 or 4 of them have really helped me brainstorm some places in here where it makes sense for them. So, yeah, I mean, and they get excited about it, and they wait for the new one. And now that I'm kind of beyond, like when Warminster ends, everything else is going to be brand new. So for them, they're not going to see some of their characters in it, and they're going to wonder where I'm going with stuff. So that I think the element of surprise will help them kind of string them along too. Plus,
Right.
I am shameless in asking, please buy my book. Don't buy one and give it to your family so they can borrow. Buy 3 of them so everyone has a copy. Like that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. We're asking for reviews. So I always depend on them for that kind of stuff to help me as well. So
I love
yeah,
that. That's
I
great.
I, I can't help it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And then you kind of hook them with the first series and they're like, you're kind of in it, haha. And now it's like, now you're sucked in. Now you have to read everything.
That's right. Now you want to know what happens. Does your character live or die, right?
And with the
And
new
they don't
series,
all
now
make
it's
it.
like you just gotta like trust me, man. You've followed me this far.
Yeah,
That's
come
great.
along for the ride. You know what I mean? That's exactly right.
Yeah, yeah. Come along for the ride is absolutely the way it should go. So with Warminster transitioning into AR video games, which is really cool, what excites you the most about this new format? And like how do you envision this melded reality enhancing the storytelling experience for both gamers and readers?
Well, any author wants to see their art in other forms of media. right? Whether that's a movie or a TV show, or in this case, you a video game, you're excited about that. I mean, the concept that what you've written has inspired someone else to basically do their own version of fan art on it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's what this has become. So for me, excited is not the word I would use as much as anxious, because you never
Mm,
like, there are days where I'm like, is this really going to go well? Are they going to crush my story and handle it poorly? And other days where I'm on the sideline laughing as they go through this stuff. So, my role in all of that is storyboarding. Hey, here's the rubric in which you can work. Here's some general rules about these characters. But, as anybody knows, that's a gamer, you know, characters. I mean, especially if you're creating your avatar, you can go off and do whatever. You don't have to follow the rules. You can side with the bad guys if you want, and things like that too. So, for them, they're putting together, they've got a whole host of headaches I've never had, because mine's very linear. I know the
sure.
story. I control 100% of the outcome of the story. And that's the way it's going to happen. Where here, they've got to take in variables from outside influence as part of that. So for me, storyboarding has gotten me the most excited to see how they, create these code written avatars of people. And sometimes they're like police sketch artists. They're like, right, bang, tap dead center, like, and that's like, oh yeah, that's Ritter, or that's Adeline. In other cases, you're like, what's that? Like, what'd you do with that? Well, this is how I expected the antler man. It's like, no, doesn't work that. But you coach them, you do as best you can. And what I've learned is understand that they know their medium better than I know their medium. If they were walking into mine and asking me to take their video game and make it a book, let me write the book. And I'll ask you questions, but the book's it's just in a different form. And what I've learned in the short time that I've been doing it is let them do what they do best, because they're experts at it, and just be there to help them. So I went from really being the coach to the offensive coordinator, right? Like, I get to help make calls and game plan, but it's all them. They're the players on the field on this one, and so that's got me excited and anxious.
Sure.
So
How did that whole
that's how I'd
process
answer
get,
that one.
how did it all start? Like, did they approach you? Did you approach them? Like, how did that all come together?
Yeah, the CEO of the company read my novels at a geekathon. I was selling them at a convention center, or at a GalaxyCon. And he bought it, didn't know who I was. I didn't know who he was. And he's like, I love this. Is it a series? I was like, yeah, you just got the first two. Should be four. He's like, let's go. And so we teamed with a couple of other groups to do that. His company is called Melderverse. And it's both augmented and virtual reality games. And he's teamed with Big Cat, which is a very well-known video game company, to create one of the first melded reality games, where you could play it on your computer, or you can also play it on your phone, or eventually you'll be able to put on your goggles and play it that way when it gets to VR in a couple of years. So that
Wow.
it was just serendipity is the way I would describe it.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds so cool. Like, for me, I've talked on the podcast before about like the direction a lot of books, I think, like in the future, how things can go. AR and VR are definitely a part of it. And then also having like the audio visual novels, and like seeing them come to life in like almost like a like pick your own like ending kind of scenario type situation too. And it's just really interesting to see how we're almost mixed mediating our stories, and how like continuing to go. We kind of did that obviously with film and television, but at the same time, this is like almost a different animal. It's just so cool.
Yeah, I mean, I'm enjoying watching it develop, and I like the idea of it being in multiple places, because if you're a gamer and you play the
Yeah.
game, you might read the books. If you're a reader and you read the books and you find out it's a game, you might go buy the game, all of which is good for me.
Heck
Right. And
yes.
what you're trying to do is, see this in as many different forms as you can, with the notion that it's not going to be perfect. I tell people that everybody has the same thing where they read the book and then they go see the movie. What do they always say? The book was better. Well, of course the book was
Yeah.
better, because it was 100% perfectly imagined in your mind, the way you wanted to read it and the way you interpreted it. When you go to a movie, it, I use this example all the time. I'm a big Jack Reacher fan. And you read Lee Child's 20 plus novels of Jack Reacher, and then Tom Cruise at 5'6" is cast as the 6'8" John Reacher. And you're like,
I was
what
like,
is
what?
this? And you just don't get it. Yeah, it wasn't anything against his performance. He did a really good job, but he's not Jack Reacher. That's not
Yeah.
Jack Reacher. And so for me, you're like, and you get that same angst about seeing this in other places. I mean, does the characters in the video game, are they going to match up well within your head? And as long as you have some level of artistic license with that, then you let them do what they need to do while also giving them the guidelines. I look at it as guardrails on a highway. Anything you do within those guardrails, you're fine. Just don't go outside those guardrails. Let me set them for you. And
Yeah.
then you work your magic, and I'll just stand back and enjoy myself.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it because otherwise you can kind of go crazy. I mean, when you think about it, most stories is going to take you anywhere from what, 6 hours to in some cases 20 some odd hours, depending on how long the story is. So there's no way anything that you're going to create like outside that novel is going to match up. And so you kind of have to just let it go and enjoy it for what it is, the new format for what it is. So, speaking of enjoying new formats, you've also got a graphic novel format with anime style graphics that you're considering, right? You're just in the consideration phase. What led you to that decision?
Yeah, I have
And
a
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm again, a comic nerd. Growing up, I loved them.
Right.
And I was approached, someone who was doing fan art for my novels. I really enjoyed his art, and we eventually connected online. And I said to him, you're really, bang on with some of these characters. And he's like, well, he does graphic novels. And he's like, I do the black and whites, and then I've got a colorist, and then we just need to find a house to publish it. So I talked to my publisher about it because she doesn't do any of that stuff. But what I thought was interesting was I already had a guy that I liked that already had experience doing it, that was just doing fan art that I put on my website and stuff like that. And he was doing coats of arms and just pictures of certain characters, and sending them to me just to have fun with it because he was
Yeah.
enjoying reading the novels. And that's really where it came from. And then the concept of having something, and let's face it, I mean, there's a lot of novels that become graphic novels, and there's a lot of graphic novels that find their way onto the silver screen or back into a novel format. And so they're really close to one another, but there's stark differences in them. By way of example, some of my chapters are 5,000 to 8,000 words long. And when you open up a comic and you're reading that chapter, you basically have 2 pages. You know what I mean? And you've got
Right.
these cells, and in those 4 to 8 cells, and then you get words like pow and wham, and so you have to tell that story that is epic fantasy, and you got to narrow it down to words and almost what I
Images.
would describe as camera angles, where like you
Mm.
see a character from a certain way, or there's an exaggerated feature or something crazy, or there's a wobble to the character showing them that they're nervous or scared. Things like, and I don't have to think about that when I'm writing it. I just tell you, right? This is,
Yeah.
the character
Yeah.
does something that it will tip you off that they're scared. And you try to do that with an epic fantasy novel, and you're like, oh my God, this is going to be like 100 comics deep before we get done with book one. And that's the challenge there, right? Is like, how much
Right.
do you cut out? How much do you leave out while also telling a good enough story that people will buy them? There can't be
Mm.
big gaps in them. So there's
Yep.
going to be things that are omitted for the sake of space and time, and that part's frustrating because there are big swaths of the story that are just going to go by the boards, and there's nothing you can do except
Sure.
let it happen so that you can get it done in a novel like that.
Sure, that makes sense. I wonder if at some point you could always do like little spin-off ones where it's like, here's a little side story that you missed in the main the main event. Just little side things to give your fans and your audience a little glimpse into some of the things that they obviously still enjoy in the novels part of it. But that's really cool. The concept of graphic novels is very interesting to me. It's kind of combines the world of obviously graphic design in my head and then writing, but it's not something that I've personally delved into. So it's really interesting to hear how it goes. And obviously that makes total sense about having to boil things down. How long are the novels?
The graphic novels, they're going to be
Your
standard.
actual
Oh,
novels.
oh, mine. They're about 150,000 words, maybe 450 to 520 pages. So a little on the light side for what would be described as epic fantasy. They're not 800 pages deep or anything like that, but they still qualify for that. And I think the fact that there's a history and there's a future and there's a now, and I've built an entire world out of it. It's not like a Conan the Barbarian setting, which is more sword and sorcery or classic fantasy, where you're
Right.
episodically going from place to place. There's a real entire world that's built around it, religions, politics, history, all that kind of stuff in a very Tolkien-esque way that I think would also make sure that it's firmly within that epic fantasy camp.
Sure. Yeah. And so trying to boil it down into even the game would be difficult because it's still, I mean, that's still a lot of words. And it puts, the reading time, what is that? Probably between 25 and 30 hours to read. So it's
Yep.
like, yeah,
Yep.
trying to boil that down and into a game. I mean, games at least have, you can have that be longer, or it takes you on a different scenario, but graphic novels are going to be a lot easier to
It's
read.
tough.
Yeah. And so it's like, oh, goodness. Okay, so as the owner of Altered Reality magazine, which is another crazy cool thing that you're doing, can you explain what motivated you to create the magazine and how does this platform support other emerging authors?
Yeah, sure. So Altered Reality was a magazine that had predated me. I actually wrote for it and had submitted a serial that I've now turned into a young adult fantasy novel. And during the time that I was there, I became friends with the owner, and she had started it, and it was really a for love of kind of thing. And it had been around for a good 10 years, but needed a facelift. And I think that people visiting the site thought that it might have a tired look to it. And she got into a situation, with her at home. It just didn't make sense for her to have it anymore. And she approached me as one of the I don't want to say the few folks because I don't know that to be true, but one of the folks that had some business acumen and said, look, I think I've got something here that in the right hands, will pay for itself and then some. I just am not that person. I just put this together as a forum for authors to come and express their art. Would you
Right.
be interested in taking this over? And so I did. The entrepreneur in me, was like, oh, great, just another business for me to get my
Because
hands
why
into.
not?
And yeah, and I looked at it and I said to myself, there's a few things here that I saw that had real value to it. One is, the site has like 180,000 visitors a year. I mean, it's really popular, and there are some legacy authors there that write and have been writing for years, for the
Wow.
magazine. But there was some restrictions that the previous owner had put on it based on religious stuff. She didn't want to have undead or vampires or things like that, which are some very popular speculative fiction categories. And so
Right.
with that kind of lifted, I'm now able to add things about cryptids and gothics and fae and other things like that. And that opened it up even broader. And secondly, with the viewership, the folks of the visitor base, the unique visitors that we get on a monthly basis, we have everybody that is award-winning authors, like like real big awards, all the way down to first portal of publication for many, like it was for me. Like my novels hadn't been published before my serial was on Altered Reality. So I saw it as a way, and not as a give back, but as a portal, like I mentioned before, for authors. So we accept, an eclectic mix, right? And we don't pay for anything. People don't expect to get anything from us as they do. And as a result, I have it sponsored by a few sponsors that help pay for the site, and we make some money on it, and or authors that want to promote their books on the site. We'll do that for them as well, and that's how we make money. But I've also made it in her in left it in her spirit, in the sense that it's not there for us to make a ton of money on it. It's there as a
Sure.
resource. And so I invite people that I have on my podcasts and on my blog talk radio show and people that I meet at conventions, all to write for the magazine. And some are highly established, and you'll know the names if you just go on the site and look at them and say, oh, I didn't realize this person was there. But in other cases, it's, hey, you need something, let's take a look at it, let's edit it together, and if it stands the test of an editorial red pen, yes, I'll be your first portal, but I'm not paying you for it. And so you could take it down whenever you want. If you want to keep it on the site eternally, it'll be there forever. More than happy to do that. And so, after we refreshed it, we put some money into, kind of rebuilding the site. We relaunched it last year, and now this fall will be our second year in business. And it's kind of grown not only in popularity, but it's also making money for me and my two business partners. And so they're happy and I'm happy. While we're also providing a service to many that are looking for a place to say, I've got something that's publishable, and look what I've been able to do here. Put it on their resume, put it in their letters to agents or their query letters to publishers. You could find me published here at a credible source that's been around for over a decade. Right?
Right.
It's not just some blog I put together. So I think that's helped, and I also think it's a way for me to give back to the community that helped me. If it wasn't for Kelly, I wouldn't have, I wouldn't have had my published work or found my publisher. So like, there's a variety of those things that I saw that I'm now helping to provide for others that used to be me just a short 4 years ago.
Right. That's amazing. What kind of genres do you accept at the magazine?
Speculative fiction and speculative poetry. And so speculative is pretty broad, right? So you can find things in there that are the standards, the sci-fi, the fantasies, the dystopians, the horror, the gothic, the cryptids, monster stories. We've had, fae, like you name it, you'll find it within there. And, we don't, I mean, there's a few things in there that are fan arty a little bit, but nothing that would get anybody in trouble, us or them, for the stuff that they do. We've even expanded. We're now doing quarterly specials where it's a PDF that you can download, and we're looking to see if we can get some printed copies. Although I'm not sure we need to do that. We're budgeting that right now. And those printed copies in those quarterlies, we have a theme. So
Okay.
December's theme was dark fantasy. This theme coming up for spring is no theme. Prior to that, we had done cryptid currency, so it was all monster stories for Halloween, and in the summer, it was summer camp horror stories around the fireplace, that kind of stuff. And so we've had cosplayers, we've had artists put stuff up, anything that we found that is a so it's not just me writing a poem or me writing a short story or a novel or a serial rather. It's now open to other artists too, and so we're getting folks that are volunteering to do our cover art and have a lot of fun. We're challenging people to do that. Here's some of our covers. Do you think you have the stuff to do it? If so, go ahead and submit, and maybe you'll be our cover artist of the month or whatever. And so we have a lot of fun with it because we create the rules. There are no rules, right? So
Right.
I want to put something in there, I can, right? I had the craziest thing that happened to me was I had a retired Catholic priest write a novel that had a little bit of religion, buried into it, but it was basically an exorcism kind of story, right?
Oh my
And
gosh.
he's like,
Okay.
"Is this going to be a problem?" And I'm like, "No, that's a perfect thing for us. We'll take it." You know what I mean? Because it's horror. You know what I mean? And,
Yeah.
he's like, "Yeah, but it's not really." And I was like, "It's great. Let's just do it." And the fact that you're a retired priest tells me that maybe I like the idea of alluding to the fact that maybe there's some of this weird funky stuff that happened. You wrote a story about it to protect the innocent. You changed the names, and even if it's not true, even if you just made it up, let's run with that because that'll
Right.
get people to come and click on it. So so
Oh, too fun.
I didn't even know until I started this. I didn't know that there was horror poetry. I had our first horror poetess on, and she then she'd made a book out of her. I don't. They're not called books. I can't remember what collections of poems are called, but that whatever that is, she's now going to publication for that. But it started with her coming on the site. We did an interview for her. She was our poet of the month, and we had horror poetry.
That's so cool.
Uh,
Ah,
Apparently, that's a thing, and I was like, all right, and all of a sudden
that's
now I've
awesome.
got 15 of those submissions every quarter.
Too cool is that?
Or,
Oh, I love that. I
yeah.
love when you can take like what's seemingly almost ironic and like create something from it, like the priest writing the horror stuff or horror poetry. I mean, I've always loved that kind of concept. I think Joss Whedon definitely like tainted my brain
Oh
back in the
yeah.
day.
Oh yeah. No, no, no. I get a lot of brains, right? So we're
Right?
okay.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, what advice would you give to writers who are looking to build their own unique worlds and possibly venture across the different media like you are with games and comics?
The first thing I would give them from basic advice is, read and deep read the genre you want to write in, right? Like know what's contemporary, know what is expected, know what readers want. If you want your stuff to sell, if you're doing it just for the sake of the art, then it really doesn't matter what I'm about to tell you because you're just doing it and you're getting it out there and your family and friends will like it. And, a few nerds like me will probably read it and love it too. But, ultimately, if the goal is to make it as an author, an artist, any kind of creative, you have to know what's hot right now, and it's okay to go back to the future every now and then. But ultimately, there's landmines out there that you might not recognize, and I'll give you one example. I mean, Tolkien wrote the most popular fantasy novels of all time, hands down by far was the granddaddy of them all. But when you read them, it's mostly white European guys, right? And that would never fly in today's fantasy adventure. There's an expectation of sexual orientation, there's expectation of races, there's an expectation of a variety of things that if you're not reading today's novels, you wouldn't be aware and you might step in it, right? And so
Yeah.
read your stuff and then know what readers are reading because they're going to want more of it. It's not by accident that you see all these novels coming out that oh, this is similar to Sarah Moss. Well, no kidding. Sarah's
Right.
killing it,
Romanticy it
right? So
is. Woo.
yeah, so let's so like you see a lot of romantasy that might not have been a thing 10 years ago, but because
Mhm.
Sarah's super popular, boom, or Brandon Sanderson, and the way
Yep.
he deeply builds his worlds, or the fact that he went out for whatever reason and said doing a Kickstarter campaign he didn't need to do, but everybody bought in, and so now everybody's doing their own Kickstarters to help their own indie authorship.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. Just know what's happening now and where your art fits into that. I think that's important. And then behind that, recognize that not all these things happen by accident. Like I work my butt off. This is my job. This is my business. I am an entrepreneur, and my books are my brand, right? And if you look at it through the eyes of your owning a business when you start this, people forget, because I could just put a book up onto Amazon. Yeah, that's great. So did 80,000 other people in April alone and
Hmm.
in March alone. And so by the end of the year, you have millions of new pieces and then 10 years of Amazon's existence. And you're just floating out there with your one piece of who's going to find you, right? So you have to make noise. You have to call attention to yourself. And you do that through a number of ways. You can use social media because it's free. And if you stay vigilant on it, you'll get promoted by the algorithms. If you're creative on it, that's even better because people will pay attention to that and then draw into that. I'll give you an example of a romantasy here in a second. I just found out I didn't see it, but someone said that to me over the weekend. One of the women I was at a convention with, and I was like, okay, whatever. I didn't get it, but it worked. And I'll get back to that in a second. You go to conventions, go to book fairs, go to literary festivals, go to libraries, go to call indie bookstores and go there and sign. Even if there's 3 people, who cares? That's 3 more readers that bought your stuff that you didn't have before that night. And grab those emails because those emails are going to be important to you. And as an indie author, you have some things you can do that I can't as a traditionally published author. People will give stuff away in order to get their emails through BookFunnel and other groups like that, things like that. I would avail yourself to all of those resources because that's how you're going to build your readership. And if you set your expectations, just like a business, it's an investment. In book 1, I'm not going to make any money. In book 2, I'm not going to make any money. In book 3, hopefully I break even. In book 4, I can start making money. Now all of a sudden you're looking at it, you're like, oh yeah, now it's just like I invested in a business. I have a storefront and employees and all this money that came out of me first, and then when I get it back, now all of a sudden it's paid down and there's equity that comes with that. And I think I would ask any author, traditionally published or not, indie, whatever, treat it as a business. And if you treat it that way, you'll be successful at it and use the resources that are out there for you. Now, I'll go back to this romantasy thing because it really jumped out at me. So I didn't know this because this isn't for me. As you can tell, I have a voice for radio. But there was apparently there's a guy that, or face for radio, I should say. There's this famous British guy that got like 500,000 views because he wrote a romantasy novel. I don't even know his name, but he filmed himself, and I guess he's a sexy British guy with a British accent and all that kind of stuff. And he just took his suspenders off, and that was enough to get him 500,000 followers on TikTok or whatever. And it was
Why
just
was
like
he wearing
the action
suspenders in the first place?
well, apparently it was like
Okay.
it was like a it was the way she described it to me was he was in a tuxedo, but the jacket was
Oh,
already
okay.
gone. He
Okay,
was still
fair.
wearing a bow tie. And they was like, I'm going to drop these. And all the ladies were like, ooh, follow the sexy British guy. Well, I'm not a sexy British guy, so that's not going to work for me. But that's what I'm saying. He got all these followers because someone noticed him. And so if you do something different, like I spent a little money on it because I wanted to, but when I did my book trailers, I went out and I found a cinematographer and I invested and we did some 3D modeling and behind the scenes stuff. And I had the behind the scenes uh, Instagram post that he did about making the castle that he used in the book trailer got 250,000 views. And the trailer itself, maybe 20,000, right? Like
Isn't that crazy?
it wasn't even the ballpark. It was the fact that it was behind the scenes and people were hashtagging Hogwarts. And I'm like, that's not Hogwarts. That's a castle that's going to be attacked soon. And it's like, they didn't care. Like, it was
Yeah.
just you fun. And so like that kind of stuff gets you noticed, and being noticed, people do your downloads, listen to your books, buy your books, whatever it is that they're doing
Yeah.
these days. And I think that That's the kind of advice I would give because it will help to launch you. It'll get you to that next level. There's a lot of groundwork needs to be done. If you do that well enough and your stuff is good enough with the right kind of promotion, boom, you're at that
Oh
next
yeah.
level, and then you just keep building from that.
Yeah, for sure. I've had a conversation recently with Roy Ozing, and he talks about like his branding is all about be different or be dead. And so he's a marketing professional, and it's so great because like it literally is like find that piece of your creativity, of yourself, of your brand that you can really push that no one else has, and just like go all in with it and do something that's really interesting that catches the eye. It's so important. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because we don't think that. We kind of I think a lot of authors, especially indie authors, they have a little bit of that worth question. Like they're not quite sure, like, will people really want to read this or do they really want to know about me? And it's like, who cares? Just make a big deal about it and they'll be like, "Oh, okay, let's make a big deal about it." You know?
Yeah, it's that imposter syndrome. That might be another
Yeah,
piece of advice that you can give to them too, is like your stuff's good enough. People will read it, right? So, and I don't care if you've written one piece or 500 pieces. The minute you write something and you throw it out into the ether, into the interwebs or whatever you want to call them, now all of a sudden you're an author. You could be an indie or you could be Stephen King. It doesn't matter. People are curious and they'll find something that they've Googled something that's crazy. They want to read something that's nutty. And, fantasy comedy. I had a guy send me his Douglas Adams kind of thing, and I'm like, this is funny. It's really, really good. And I would never read it any other way, but it was because it was like on a show like this. He's like, would you read my stuff? And I'm like, sure. He sent it to me. I'm like, dude, this is really good. Let's get you on a radio show. We did some stuff and it was a lot of fun. But that kind of stuff, I was like, don't be afraid of it. There is no imposters out there. If you've written something and you've put it out there and you've had it edited properly and with people that are being truthful with you, then that's not imposter syndrome. That's just being an author, and you got to work for it. It's not going to come to you by accident.
right. Absolutely. Well, and I mean, you've done the hard part anyway. It's like you've written the thing that most people say, I want to write a book one day. I wish I could write a book. And it's like, you've done the thing. Like, make a fuss about it because
Yeah,
it's a big deal. Yeah.
that's exactly
Okay, so
right. I mean, how many other people do you know that've written a book, right? Yeah, so like take credit for what you've done and and live off of it and make sure that people you know, look, not everything's going to be a rousing success, but do what you
right.
can do, and
Keep
just keep
learning from
working
it.
at it. Not
Yeah.
everything I've spent money on or time on has actually worked for me. But if you don't try it, you don't know, and it
That
might work for some person and not for someone else.
that's so smart. I agree with that. Okay, so with the final book of the Warminster Saga soon to launch and other projects on the horizon, what are your aspirations for the next few years? Like, are there new genres or formats that you're going to be exploring with the next series?
Yeah, so I have a couple of things that are happening. I'm going to be doing another trilogy as a follow up to the quadrilogy, but in the interim, I've got three smaller stories of the more popular characters in the novels, kind of giving a behind the scenes look at where they came from, because I get a lot of those questions at shows and at book signings and things like that. But we're also in concurrence going to be working on the video game and the graphic novel development. And then while all these smaller books have been launched, that gives me about a year to get a head start on the next epic fantasy thing, which I already know how it's going to go. But like right now, it's like, oh, like I just don't have the juice to get that done. I need that extra year
Yeah.
to kind of get that ready and rolling. And so I'm working on that. And so 2025 will be the year of the standalone origin stories, coupled with working through video game and graphic novel. And then 2026 is going to be the next Warminster trilogy. And hopefully I'll have it all done. I'll be able to rapid release it as rapidly releasable as epic fantasy is. Maybe get it done
Right.
in a year and a half. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's so
that's
smart
what's on
that
the
you've
docket.
recognized for yourself like the capabilities in your creative juice, as you say because there's a lot of authors who are pushed through like that burnout aspect of it because they think they have to do something in a certain time frame, but it's so smart like that you can recognize, nope, I'm going to need to use this year as this and then go into it. Is that something that you've always kind of like innately seen or done?
So as a planner, yes, I have.
Good
I can't
point.
help
Good
myself.
point.
Eagle Scout, be prepared, whatever you want to say. Like yes, but the problem is I can't, like, if you said, I've seen those like challenge 24-hour challenge. No, that's not for me. Here's 3 words. You've got 2 hours to cut. No, no, it's not me because I'll ask dumb questions. Like, where
Yeah.
is this story going and where am I coming? Now, I might be able to come up with a really cool idea or a scene that could lead to something else, but to stop at that is not me. And so I've tried to learn how to write small. Like I use Kindle Vella to write a young adult episodic serial, which I released, which I'm now putting into a 3-part series as part of that, just so I can walk away, so I can challenge myself not to have to write epic all the time, and I can write something that's more digestible for someone that's on a train on the way to work or has kids at a soccer game, right? And I think that those kind of things are important to recognize too. And that kind of training I've used so that I'm not always having to write something that's that way. I'll tell you what, I hate it. I'm not good at it. I
You
love the
hate
grand
it.
sweeping domains, and let me tell you the saga and that, like that kind of stuff. These little bits and it's not for me. It's not for me. I like reading them, but I can't write them. It's just so I'm trying to train myself, and it's a struggle. But I think there's some note. I'm trying to say, Joe, you're being noble by giving it a run and seeing if you can make it work. And it's okay. I mean, people like it, but like I also recognize the fact that I'm better at something else. And so I
But
think I'll
that's
just
good
stick to
though,
what I'm
because like you
better at.
said earlier, you don't know until you try it. And so you don't know what kind of lessons you're going to end up taking from that aspect. Even if it ends up ultimately not being the thing that you're going to do forever and ever, there's lessons being learned here, and you're picking them up and going, which tools do I want to keep from here? That's really cool. That's
Oh
a
yeah,
smart way to be able to look at it. Not a lot of authors do that either. It's like, I love the way that you're embracing like all the things just to see which parts of this author creation world like you want to incorporate and how it gets to be a part of your entrepreneurship of your like everything, your brand, whatever. Because that's I think the way the industry is going to celebrate authors. It's going to really encourage authors to go that direction because at some point storytellers aren't going to just be writing books. You might be doing that, but I mean, look at the way that ChatGPT is,
right.
revolutionized everything. It's like we're going in new directions that some people aren't willing to quite yet let go of, like the old ways. And so it's really cool to see how diverse you are with everything that you're doing. That's really neat. Speaking of
Yeah.
those diverse creations, how do you hope your work influences both current fans and future generations of writers and gamers with all of the things that you've done? Like because you've got so many diversified aspects.
So I started this conversation by telling you what I used to do in the real world, and my world was filled with 20 years of very real stuff. For me, fantasy has always been my form of escapism, right? And escapism tells me it's entertaining. And so what I want this first and foremost is I want it to entertain people. It doesn't have to be their favorite, but were you entertained? And would you come back and buy the next? And I think that's really what I hope for. My goal is you walk away and say, oh, that was really well written. I enjoyed that novel. I'll read the next one. It doesn't, I'm not trying to be Tolkien. I'm not trying to be some classic overnight and, Stephen King. And my goals are set in the sense that if you read it and you're happy with it, you're going to buy my next and the next and the next. And so I think that that also plays into that middle part of our conversation about being a bit of an entrepreneur. So I want to put product on the street that people are enjoying and are entertained by, while also providing for my family and making money and the things that I need to do in that respect. And I think if you do those things, everything else will come with it. Like, and I think that, I did entertain someone that just happened to have a video game company that he owned, or I did entertain somebody who did fan art, and then we connected, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm a comic book guy, so can we put this together?" And I know people, and I think that comes when people are willing to go out of their way to do something. And if I just read a novel and I never met the author, or I didn't know how to get a hold of them, or didn't see them, they didn't explain it to me, and I was looking at the cover and, oh, should I buy this? Should I not? For me, I think that I'm good in a room like that, and I help sell the stuff. And as somebody, as long as you read it and you're happy with it, you're entertained by it, and you walk away saying that was a pretty good book, and leave me a 4 or 5 star. I'm not saying, just saying. But those are the kind of things that you want you want people to do, because that makes that really kind of that motivates me as an author to write the next, but it also motivates you to buy the next, which I think is important. So I would say entertainment is the top goal, and then the business success that comes with it is ancillary but important if you're trying to be an author as a career.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree 100% about that. I love that outlook. Okay, Joe. So then where can my audience go to find out more about all the things that you do? You know, everything from your novels to the graphic novels to what's happening, everything, like the magazine. Where do they go?
Yeah, so it's I'm really easy to find. So JV Hilliard, HILLIARD.com, and that'll take you to my website. Or if you want to purchase the novels or download the ebook or download the audiobooks, you could find me pretty ubiquitously. Like I'm available on every platform. Go to my publisher first because I get more money if you go to the publisher first. So go to dragonmoonpress.com first. But if you're an Amazon shopper or you listen to audiobooks, you want to download them on iTunes or Audible, or you want to have that book in your hand, you want to walk in your Barnes and Noble, you'll be able to find me in all of those places. And of course, on socials, I'm really easy to find. I know this might be surprising, but at JV Hilliard Books will put you in front of me, and or just at JV Hilliard, you'll be able to find me. I'm the only one out there, and you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, and Discord. So pretty easy to find. And I always try to get back to people within 24 hours. So if you want to email me at joe@jvhilliard.com, I will try to get back to you in 24 hours. If not, that means I'm sick or there's a deadline or something else is going on and I can't, but I usually try to get back to folks.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Joe, thank you so much for being here, for explaining your wonderful series, the world that you're creating, and then everything that you do obviously is helping other authors who listen to this podcast episode like get a bigger grasp on like different ways to be able to come at their author career. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, and I would love to, come back on anytime you want to have me. This has been great, and I've enjoyed it, and I hope that your listeners, your viewership, your readership, everybody that's involved in this also enjoys it as well. Thank you very much for
I
having me.
have I have no doubt they will. Thank you. Well, there you have it, guys. Isn't Joe amazing? He is just a font of knowledge. There was so much that came out of this podcast interview that I wasn't even anticipating. And I found myself just mesmerized by all the different ways that he's been able to diversify his author creations and just get so excited about all the ways that he does things. And obviously, like having years and years of Dungeons and Dragons experience being a DM, it's going to help him like wrap his head around some of the fun storytelling that's happened. So this has been a long time in the making, even though it's only been 4 years writing. He's always been a storyteller, right? So if you're an author who's been doing a similar type of thing, right? You're making games, you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, you're a DM, like we internalize story in such unique and different ways, whether it be television shows or movies or other people's books. That's an integral part of how we create, how we interpret the world, how we understand our craft. And he had some great points, right, about being able to understand what our genre is doing in a contemporary setting so that we understand what contemporary readers are looking for. Like, what is the reader expectation right now? And it's got such good timing because for me, I've been thinking so much about authorship and about how we as indies need to really embrace this idea of being like the entrepreneur, the personal brand, the ones who are the expert really in our books and our worlds in the way that we craft. And that, like Joe said in this interview, all of us are creating something that is consumable. Now, whether or not it's going to be mass market consumable is a different story. If you're not intentionally creating, it might not be. But if you don't care about that, like my husband Colin, when he's writing, he doesn't care. He has a story to tell and he tells it. And if you're like that, that's perfectly fine too. But someone out there will read it. Someone out there will enjoy it. And so it's up to us to take a closer look at how we be as authors, how we present ourselves as authors, and how we show up to the world, announcing to those readers who we are, what we do, and why we're so amazing. I think that's a really big thing that I've been absorbing, I guess, this year. And I've been in the process of integrating and starting to include not only in the way that I handle author revolution, but also the way that I handle my books. It's been such a mindset shift that has been going on, and it's actually becoming something even bigger. Like I'm in the process of building out a new strategy for authors because marketing to me has always been a little bit like wonky. I like the aspect of using ads. I like using the aspect of newsletters and newsletter swaps. but there's always been this social aspect that has felt a little bit weird, or like I knew that there was something more I wanted to say through social, and I couldn't figure out what I was missing. And so I've been in the process of delving into like the psychology of why buyers buy, why readers purchase, right? And creating a strategy that is going to be in alignment with the buyer phases. And I think it's really going to be a game changer for authors when it comes to social selling, and then also the automations and the things that go on behind the scenes that will continue to generate sales for us. So just keep in mind, nothing is available yet. I might have a beta launch out possibly at the end of September, but just know that there's something really big in the works and it's going to be amazing. And if you want to kind of get a flavor of how it's looking, feel free to like check out the way that Author Revolution or Carissa Andrews or Carissa Knight are showing up on Instagram or TikTok, because that's where I'm actually posting the strategy and testing things out and playing around with the different things. But the strategy itself, I'm going to start teaching once we get past the masterclass that I'm teaching this coming Friday. So September 20th, I'm teaching a masterclass on the energetics of multiple pen names. If you're an author with multiple pen names and are trying to wrap your head around how to align energetically with both or multiples, you're going to want to join this masterclass because it's going to be a game changer for you. I will make sure that the link is in the show notes today. And so just make sure that you check that out. Head over to authorrevolution.org/253 to learn more about that. And then, of course, I will have all of the links to Joe's, like his magazine, his site, his socials, all the things. So if you're wanting to look for Joe, head over, like I said, to authorrevolution.org/253. It's all going to be right there. Well, guys, there you have it. Here's another great instance, another great interview, another great discussion about how we can be the game changers of our author career. So go forth and start your author revolution.